Hello everyone, welcome to Methods 2 Week 7. In this tutorial we will be looking at all the necessary components and commands needed to complete your Assignment 3 Part 3, which is looking at introducing pathways into your topography model, as well as how do we document all these changes that we've done, not only to the building but also to the landscape. So how do we create site plans, and sections, for instance? First off, I will be using this example building and topography model that was provided in class. This is the building model that we've been using in a lot of other tutorials, as well as the topography model that everyone has been given. So first off, we need to double check and make sure that everything that we have is appropriate and that our layers are nice and orderly. So for instance, we have our added topography layer as well as our removed topography layer. And we can see how what was usually supposed to be in the original topography model has now been removed since these changes that we've been making. We can also turn on our smooth topography, and we can see how that compares to our step topography model. And that is the first step in this assignment, is altering or editing our smooth topography model to match our steps, our altered new steps topography model. So first off, I'm just going to turn all of this off, turn off my example building, and just look at the model itself and what we've removed and what we've added. So we can see here what we've actually added and what we've removed. What we can do is look at the open curves that were used for creating the smooth topography. I'm going to turn off this. We can see if we were to redraw these curves where the removed topography is, we'd be getting a lot of 90-degree angles, especially in this area. But with the command that we're using, patch, creating 90-degree curves will not result in a very nice patched surface. It will approximate those curves and actually create a surface that is smooth and not a 90-degree pit like we were showing in the original model. So what I'm going to do is just really focus on this top layer right now. All I'm going to do is just duplicate this edge. I can turn off my remove now, and I can just trim this. And just join these elements together. Our added topography is very minimal at this stage, and not sure we need to be adding that to these lines right now. We can edit that a little bit more later. But for now, let's just turn that off. And I know this is pretty minimal at this stage, but this is just so you can get an idea of how this stuff works. So I'm going to just patch the surface, similar to what we did in the beginning. Make sure all of our options and things were the same. That way we get a very similar surface. Turn on our smooth solid poly surface. It looks very similar, but we can tell that there are some changes, especially when we zoom in and we start seeing like these double lines. So all I'm going to do now is just duplicate this face border of the bottom. Rather than doing the bounding box, we can just extrude this curve through here and Boolean split using that new topography that we created. Now we have our new polysurface, our edited polysurface, which I'll just create a new layer for that. Poly edit. Change that layer. I can turn off all these other elements. So if I turn on our building again, you can still see we need to remove these elements that we're digging into, these pink elements. What I'm going to do is just turn on my ghosted, turn off my building again. And I'm going to just redraw these areas with the box. Just need to make sure it extends past. And this is how we maintain those 90-degree angles in certain instances. Boolean difference now. Delete these elements, turn off that layer, and see how everything is lining up nicely now. We turn on our building. It looks pretty good. However, we don't have any paths into our site, and we don't really know, for instance, like how are we getting up here? So what we can do it a couple of different ways. First off, I'm just going to go to my top view and just draw a single curve that is acting as the center point of my path. You can go something like that. And we can see that in our perspective view, that curve is kind of taking at different z levels or z axes, just because we're drawing in a 2D nature but through a 3D object. So all we can do is set PT to make it all be on the same level, like that. And I'm just going to extract this surface real quick, this top surface. I'm going to project. We wanted to extract that because if we were not to extract that surface, we'd actually get a curve that runs on the top as well as the bottom and possibly even the sides. This just eliminates one extra step. All we can do to get that back together, we can just select all those elements and type join. Now they're all joined back together. That's a closed solid polysurface. I'm going to leave the building off for now. Now let's draw the profile for our path. I just drew a simple rectangle, and I want to make sure that from the midpoint to the edge, it's 10 feet. So it'll be a 20-foot path altogether. And I'm going to go to my perspective using the gumball. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. That way it's vertical and perpendicular to our path. I'll put that in the middle of the path. And I'm going to use a command called sweep. So select the rail and select the shape. As you can see, similar to extrude curve, sweep extrudes that shape that you drew here along a curve. So this curve, while it may not be planar in one direction, it is still able to be used as a rail or a base for this curve to be extruded along. I'm going to use road-like because I want it to be a little bit more smooth. If I was to do freeform, we can see that it's not exactly flat. This is a little bit more flat and better for paths. So I'll click OK. We can see that it's an open poly surface. I'm just going to cap that real quick. You can also see that since I drew it on top of the curve, it's not intersecting that much. So I'm just going to lower it down like 8 inches. And now all I need to do is Boolean split. I can delete this. See that we have this path that has been split from the surface. Now, because of the nature of sweep, and since that path curve was not always completely perpendicular or following the shape of the path of the topography, the distance that we are excavating for this path varies drastically in some instances. So in order to fix that and also to create a path that is not so uniform in its width, we can, I'm going to undo everything there. I'll delete this path. And I'll go back to my top view. So let's say I actually want a path that is super wide at the top, but then gets shorter as it goes down. Or narrower, I should say. So like something like that. Right? Again, we can set PT. Any point that we want, just make sure it's above the terrain. And then extrude it, expand this view again. And we can close this curve. And join those. I'll extrude this curve up and down. And we can Boolean split. Now if I delete this first element, you see that it has split the entire surface. Now we just need to lower this that 8 inches that we had from before. And this is how we can ensure that the entire surface, while it is the same curvature and the same topography, is now just like 8 inches shorter. We can Control Shift that bottom surface, just move it vertically where it is in line with the previous version. Now we can do Boolean union. Might take a little while. Oh, it failed. Let's see why. Oops. I'll move this down. Boolean union. Okay, that worked. So instead of doing Control and Shift to move this manually, we can just extrude this surface. To kind of erase our Boolean difference, that piece from the bottom. I'll merge our coplanar surfaces. And if I turn on my building again, now we see that this path leads directly to our building, which is nice. However, now that we have this edited smooth topography, it no longer matches our step topography, as we can see here, right? So what we can do is just redraw our step topography, which is actually very easy now that we have a closed polysurface. What we can do is, I'm just going to lock this, and I'm going to create a new layer. Make sure we have our layers clean and easy to understand. I'm going to do poly, stepped, then edit. So we know like exactly what we're working with. And I'm going to just turn off my building real quick. So that's what we need to work with right now. I'm going to use the command contour. Select the object to contour, which is our poly surface, our smooth poly surface. I'm going to press enter. the base point. This is why I kept on the step topography, so I know exactly where we're starting from, which is this point down here, and the direction perpendicular, which is just north, or up, I mean, and the distance between contours, which is 1 foot. So all of these lines, if I turn off the edited surfaces, we can see that we have all of these lines. And when you look at how the lines for the path look, they look pretty nice. There are a couple instances where things are not lining up perfectly, and what we can do is just fix those. First, I'm going to join everything together. And we can turn on our closed curves, which are the red ones. You can see where things are not exactly lining up. Now we have a couple of options. Either we can trim these to where they fit, or what I would rather just do is just close these curves. Just type in close curve. And we'll close these automatically. Some instances where there may not be straight, we might have to draw them manually. Just easy. Here as well. And once you do this, make sure you join them together. Close curve. And this last one up here. Close curve. I'm not sure why that one was so bad. Let's actually just duplicate this one because it doesn't need to be changed. Select my open curves. I'm just going to isolate these real quick just to see exactly what's happening. Close curve. And for instances like this, I wanted to go through these a little bit more intentional and slow. I'm not sure what's happening right here, for instance. So I'm just going to try and clean this up myself. If all else fails, you can curve Boolean. Go to the top view. Delete input all. Still kind of weird right there. These are just the tedious things, right? Close curve. Close curve. So I'm going to do select open curves again, make sure I have it all done. So I'm missing one. Let's just curve Boolean to fix this one. Still just this one. Okay. So now I'll show everything again. You can see it all here. Everything should be closed. As we can see here, closed curves. Now all we have to do is extrude the curves down. That's fine. 1 foot. Let's put these on a new layer. Turn that layer off. Now we have our step topography. I turn on my building. Fits there nicely. See how this path is actually carved into the step topography. Everything's looking fine. Now we can definitely understand exactly where all these elements are taking place. That being said, now we can look at the clipping plane. So I'm just going to make a new layer that's from the clipping plane. So clipping plane is a visual property or display property that you draw a plane or think of it like a box or surface, and it visually affects that viewport. As we can see in our object properties, the views that are being clipped right now is the perspective view. But for instance, if I uncheck that, now that perspective view is no longer clipped. Similar if I turn on my other 4 views, I turn on top, it will clip the top view. Click the right, it will clip the right view. So when we're talking about clipping, wherever this surface is located or this plane is the axis that it will be clipping. So right now we see that it's drawn on this axis and it's facing down. So we're seeing everything beneath this plane. If we were to rotate it 180, now we're seeing everything that's above that plane, but nothing underneath it. And this can be moved up and down, as we see. It can also be used in the left and right sides. Again, we're cutting through the entire model. So this is what we'll use to cut through our building and our topography to get those sections as well as those site plans or plans. So first, let's do our section. Say we want our section through this point. Seems like a pretty nice location. We actually want to go in the middle right there. That way we're cutting through all these different elements, which is a pretty nice section. We see all these solid building elements coming together and how they interact with the landscape. But this is still a perspective view. We need our section to be 2D. So let's go to our clipping view. It's mostly aligns with the front view. So let's make sure our clipping plane is affecting that front view. I'm just going to turn on shaded so we can see a little bit better. And now this is a completely 2D projection. We can select everything, make 2D, which just means make curves and lines that depict what I'm seeing in the display viewport. We want to maintain source layers. This is why we need to make sure that we have the right layers, group outport, that's fine, and clipping plane intersections. We don't need hidden lines, as you can see in the little dialog box up at the top. If we were to turn on hidden lines, it would show all those other lines that are beyond the solid element, which we don't need to see. Scene silhouette, we can see it makes the outline of the scene or the building a little bit darker. We don't need that necessarily. I'm mainly focused on maintaining source layers and clipping plane intersections. I'm just going to call this section 1. And I click OK. And we can see down here that I now have a whole new set of layers that are part of this section 1 Make 2D layer. So as a rule, all Make 2D elements are going to be shown on your top view, as you can see here. In order to select everything in that parent layer, I'm going to select sublayer objects. I'm just going to move it out of the way. That way it's not intersecting with the model. Now we can see all of these elements. However, for a section, it's kind of misleading because we see these step topography lines, which is not the true nature of the site, correct? What we actually should be using for our section is the smooth topography. So I'm going to delete that, go back to my front view, make sure instead of the step topography, I have the smooth topography turned on. Now I'll select everything again, make 2D, section 1, yeah, that's fine. Now if we pull this out, we see a lot nicer, smooth transition. See this little step here? This is where the path is and where it starts. There are a couple extra lines here and there. We can take care of those easily. So now let's look at exactly what this layer format or organization is showing us. So this top line is clipping plane intersections. That is everything that we are cutting through. If we look at the front view here, it's that dark outline that we see going through. So I'm just going to turn it off real quickly and talk about the other lines. So this here are just the additional curves that make up that view, whether it be part of the building or the backside of the terrain itself. What we can see here is when we turn on clipping plane intersections, we have what is cutting through the building as well as what is cutting through the topography. Here. And again, similar to when we were editing our topo lines, some of these may need to be closed or infilled just to fully secure that continuous curve. But for right now, let's just worry about the building itself. So I'm going to just isolate this real quick and see what's happening. So we can see here that there should be a line here, some lines here, and a line here. Now if we were to select everything in curve boolean, see that all of this is actually joined together, and if we delete all of those, this is our solid portion of the building that we're cutting through. I'll just leave it on this clipping plane intersection layer, which is fine. Actually, no. I'm going to select that again and just move to the example building. Now if we select our layers here that we cut through the topography for stylistic reasons, and there's a lot of different ways that we can handle this. I'm just going to isolate this real quick. I'm just going to keep the topmost portions. That way it's not really showing us the ending of the cut. And we don't need this as well since the building intersects it. So now if we unisolate that again, we select it, we see that the line stops where the building starts, and then picks back up where the building ends. For these other lines, we don't need that one for instance, or this one, or these because that's within the building itself. Right? If this is the mass, we can just trim these curves away. And that's all the edit that we really need to make at this point. Delete these two. Miss those. So now we have the base line work for our section done. Now all we need to do is make sure that they're in the correct layers and they show the correct thicknesses. So what I'm going to do is just create a new layer. I'm going to rename it. Name it the cut. This is the building. And I'm going to make another one cut, which is the topo. Those are going to be our thickest lines, our thickest line weights. I'm just going to do a medium, and then a light, or thin. And pull this over so we can see exactly what's happening. I'm going to change some of these objects again. This is our cut building. This is our cut topo. We know that these elements here, which are closer to the origin of the cut, right? These elements here should be medium. Maybe I'll actually have another one as well. I'll just call this one thin. Another layer. This can be light. Delete that. Delete that as well. These back lines of the topography, which are the furthest away, are the thinnest. Maybe these are light. I'm just going to turn all these off so I know what I still need to edit. Yeah, maybe all of these are light. So now everything is in their respective layer. I turn on my print preview. You see that everything is still in this default color and default line type. We want them to be continuous, but we want their print widths to change, right? So for instance, on the cut building, that wants to be pretty thick, maybe like a 0.7. The cut topo, normally that's a lot thicker. Let's just see what 2 does. Might be too thick. Let's do 1.4 or 0.2. Yeah, that's fine. Our medium, it's a little bit less than our building cut. Let's do 0.35. And then our light, and then our thin. Again, maybe that is reading all a little bit still too heavy. Let's reduce all these a little bit. That's a pretty good line weight start. Maybe this can actually bump up a little bit. But another thing we can do rather than just line weights is we can hatch, which hatch just means pocheting. We can either do this for the building or even the topography itself. For instance, I chose to do the building. I'll show you what that looks like real quick. So hatch is just filling in, making it all black. We can do it several different ways and select what hatch we want to do. Right. Maybe I want this kind of hatch, possibly a striped hatch. For typical default, black is what we should be doing. Those other hatches are mainly used for different material choices, or if you have like a specific distinction between one element and another. But for now, I would recommend everyone just using a simple black hatch. And again, that can either be for the building, or if I wanted to show the topography as the black hatch, right? I'm just drawing this quickly. Right. If this wants to be a hatch instead, then our building hatch would not exist. We only want one thing to be hatched, either the building or the landscape, not both. If we have both hatched, we don't know where the building ends and the landscape begins. So that is one example of documenting and drawing in 2D. This is a section. Similar to that, we can create plans. However, in the plans, I'll go to the top view again. If we were to take a make 2D of this, we would not be getting the same amount of information as we would if we were to turn on the step topography. So I'm just going to turn on my step topography again. And I can make 2D. Site plan. It's a lot more curves, so it's a lot more processing power. And here's our site plan. This is a site roof plan. We can also use the clipping plane. To create a site plan, floor plan. Which maybe you would want to do this kind of version better or more if you're wanting to show off exactly how you enter the building from the landscape, right? Again, like then we have to put everything on their respective layers that best matches, the building cuts, the closest lines, the furthest lines, and so on and so on. That is basically all that you need to know for this assignment. Just be sure whenever you're putting all this stuff together that you are utilizing and adjusting the lines and line weights that best demonstrate these design changes and design choices that you've done. Also using the layout tab in Random PDF and creating a very nice layout that highlights all these skills that we've been developing from assignment 1 to now. Okay, sorry that this tutorial is arriving a little late. It's due to the extension. This is going to be a little bit longer of a project, so to see everyone in class, and we can go through any troubles or problems that you've encountered already. Okay, thanks everyone.